Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Endgame. Big shout out to our Endgame community as always for joining us. I'm Pierre. With me as always is Chris. We're here to help you win for week 6 with our must-start wide receivers. We do have another giveaway. We talked about this in the must-start running back video. If you already checked that out, you can enter here too. I'll give you the details on that a little bit later on, so stay tuned. But let's get to the wide receivers. So Chris, give me a guy that you really like in week 6 based on matchups.
This might sound like an obvious name to some people, but you would be surprised how many questions I get about this guy, and it's Terry McLaurin. And that's because he's had 2 great games and 3 pretty terrible games, and people start to wonder, is this the guy I drafted? Is this an every week must-start player? Well, I'm here to tell you, yes, he is an every week must-start player, but even if you're nervous, this is not the week to be nervous. Going up against the Chiefs are allowing the most scoring drives per game on a percentage basis of any defense in the NFL, right? This is going to be an absolute shootout. One thing about the football team is they've actually been a pretty good offense this year. So I don't think this is going to be a game, where they do nothing and the Chiefs just put up a ton of points. I think this is going to be a high scoring game on both sides of the ball. Lots of fantasy points for everybody, lots of opportunity for everybody. And that means Terry McLaurin, who is the football team's #1 wide receiver and the #1 target, despite what happened in week 5. Don't worry about him at all. He's going to go off this week. Don't be surprised if Terry McLaurin is the highest scorer in week 6.
All right. Do I smell a little bit of a bold prediction there? McLaurin, look, yeah, I don't ever bench McLaurin. And in this matchup, you have to love him. So, who else is a must start for me, no matter what the situation is? It's my boy DK Metcalf. And why would you question that? Well, there's a lot of questions about what's going on in Seattle because Russ Wilson is out for at least a few weeks with that finger injury. And so it's Geno Smith at quarterback. Geno got a lot of flack from his time in New York. Of course, the New York media there just loves to rip on quarterbacks. But it's his turn. And you know what? We shouldn't worry about Metcalf because look what happened just in the second half of last week's game with Geno Smith at quarterback. DK Metcalf, 54 yards and a touchdown from Geno Smith. And that was just in half a game. So I think he will be perfectly fine. The guy I'm actually worried about is Tyler Lockett. You've heard the stat before, but the player with the top quarterback rating when throwing to a single receiver, that connection that just is magical. It's Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett. For some reason, they just click. DK Metcalf, no, maybe he doesn't have that, but that actually works in his favor now because I think Lockett kind of sees a downturn in production, and Metcalf, you just have to throw it in his neighborhood and he'll catch it. So I am not worried about Metcalf. Going against Pittsburgh, by the way, you might not know this, Pittsburgh giving up the 2nd most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So I'm actually loving Metcalf this week, even with Geno Smith at quarterback. All right, guys, we're going to keep going with our wide receivers, but first, do us a favor. If you like what you see so far, click that thumbs up, like button. We definitely appreciate it. But let's keep going with more receivers. Chris, who do you like in week 6 at wide receiver?
Yeah, I think I recommended him either as a must start or a boom last week. But either way, it worked out because Emmanuel Sanders had 2 touchdowns against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't see any reason to take him out of your lineups here in week 6, going up against that Tennessee secondary that going into last week had given up, I think, the most points to wide receivers going into last week's game. Not really sure what happened last week, right? It wasn't a huge week for those wide receivers. I mean, I guess I do know what happened. The Jacksonville Jaguars happened, but I'm not worried about that this week with, a pretty good offense in the Buffalo Bills. And they've got this guy named Josh Allen, who I think's pretty good at quarterback last time I checked. So not worried about a repeat in week 6 for the Bills of what the Jags happened. So, obviously love Diggs, but look, Sanders has kind of been eaten into Diggs' production a little bit this year, right? And I think that continues again in week 6. I mean, still love Diggs. I'm not telling you to sit Diggs, but I do love Emmanuel Sanders as well. Could have another huge game here in week 6. So if you started them in week 5, just leave them locked into your lineup here in week 6.
Yeah, I mean, on the verge of an every week must start. I think another solid week coming up might cement that. All right, so let's talk about Philadelphia. I think it's pretty safe to say, Chris, you're a fan of Jalen Hurts. And so who's his #1 target there? It's Devonta Smith. Look, Devonta Smith, been a little up and down. That's what rookies do. Jalen Hurts, basically like a rookie based on how much he's played in the league. So yeah, this team will have ups and downs, but the production when, game is on the line and they need to pass the ball, they can get it done. And we saw that at the end of the game last week. Look, going against Tampa Bay, I think it's safe to say they're going to have to pass the ball all game long to keep pace. And we also know by now, Tampa Bay is a pure funnel defense. Completely shut down the run. And, Philadelphia, it really doesn't even have a running game at this point. It's Jalen Hurts running the ball, and the running backs are just non-existent. So there could be a lot of pass attempts, and who's really their only viable receiver from a fantasy standpoint? It's Devonta Smith, right? There's nobody else you can even consider. I think there's potential for a huge game here, so you've got to plug Devonta Smith in based on what we assume is going to be very favorable game script. All right, so I did mention that giveaway at the top of the show. It's time to reveal the details. If you already saw our must-start running back video, you know what this is about. Hey, feel free to enter again here. All you have to do is leave a comment with your response. And so here's the question. Remember when I mentioned Geno Smith in Seattle? Well, let's give him some love and let's try to predict what is he going to do this coming week in his first start in I don't know how many years as a starting quarterback in the NFL. So how many total yards do you think Geno Smith is going to have, both rushing and passing, in week 6 against Pittsburgh? Just leave us a number with your answer below and you're eligible to win a t-shirt courtesy of our proud sponsor, Bear Clothing. Just give them a follow on IG at Bear Clothing and give us your answer. Whoever gets closest will win a free shirt. All right, but now let's keep going with another must-start wide receiver. Chris, who you got?
I'm going with a guy that you've been really down on all year. And look, you were right to be down on him, but now the situation has changed and you got to love him, and that's Chase Claypool, because unfortunately, Juju Smith-Schuster suffered an injury in week 6 and his season is over, right? Had season-ending surgery. And that means Chase Claypool's role is going to have to change. We know Deontay Johnson's role is going to be what his role is. He plays all over the field. He runs every possible route. He's just an absolute stud. But Chase Claypool, most of the time, is, the deep guy, the more vertical route guy. Well, that's going to have to change now, because the only other receiver they really have is James Washington, who's also a deep vertical type of guy. So Chase Claypool likely going to slot into more intermediate, shorter routes. And that's very good for Chase Claypool because, as you've talked about all year, Big Ben's arm is done. It's gone. But he can still throw those short ones, right? He can still throw the short, 8 to 10 yard passes. He just can't throw those 40, 50, 60 yard bombs like he used to be able to. So this is a big boost for Chase Claypool. And going against Seattle, one of the worst defenses in the NFL. We saw what the Rams did to them. Robert Woods had probably the game of the season that he'll have this entire year. Even Cooper Kupp, who seemed invisible in that game, still came away with 16 fantasy points. I don't see how Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool don't both go off in this one. So if you've had Chase Claypool on your bench, wondering what's going on, now's the time you can finally start him. No Juju against this bad offense. Got to be a must start in week 6.
Yeah, I'll say, look, Seattle, along with Kansas City, and for the most part, Tampa Bay, you want to stream against those defenses whenever you can with your wide receivers. And I will say that with Claypool, he's definitely jumping up value. James Washington didn't even play last week with a groin injury. If he doesn't play, it could be a lot of Claypool. So I'm definitely reversing course on him as of right now. All right, so I do like a guy in the same division, but in Cincinnati, well, not Jamar Chase. I do like Jamar Chase, and I'm definitely going to take an L on saying that he might not explode this year because he is exploding. But let's not forget about T. Higgins. So clearly not producing the way Jamar Chase is, but let's just not discount him. I know he didn't put up very big numbers from a fantasy perspective last week, but remember, coming off an injury, his shoulder, thankfully, looks fine. He's healthy. He did catch 5 passes, just not a lot of yards. It was like 32 yards. Okay, but that said, going against Detroit, should have an easier time this week, fully healthy, and I do think that he'll bounce back with a nice game. So let's just not ignore T. Higgins just because Chase is getting all the pub. I think that T. Higgins is still a solid fantasy option, and I like him as a really solid low-end wide receiver too this week. So don't ignore him. Put him back in your lineup for sure. All right, before we wrap things up with one more wide receiver pick, guys, if you appreciate what we do for you every single week, you can support us actually by becoming a patron. Check out the information for our Patreon link down below in the description. We offer weekly advice on Sunday morning, start sit advice just for our patrons. And that's something that you can't get elsewhere. We try to help you as much as possible, but if you help us out, we definitely appreciate that. We're trying to build the most welcoming, inclusive community out there. to help everybody succeed. All right, so let's get to it. Chris, give me one more must-start wide receiver.
Yeah, so if you watched our running back must-start, I talked about how Philadelphia is very good against the pass, but that's primarily because of Darius Slay, who's been great this year, and he's been shutting down number one outside receivers. Well, unfortunately, that means Mike Evans this week. But what that also means is probably more targets for Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown, who I have as a must-start this week. Right? I mean, he went off last week. Didn't expect that, but I think every Buccaneer player went off last week. Sorry, Pierre. All due respect, but it's true. And I think he's going to go off again this week because, like I said, Darius Slay is going to be a handful for Mike Evans. And we've seen in games where Mike Evans struggles against those, top-tier corners, Tom Brady just throws to the other guys. So I do like Chris Godwin a lot this week, but I also really like Antonio Brown, who you may be debating between him and some other kind of fringy wide receiver 3 type. So if you're in that situation, go with Antonio Brown. We've already seen the upside in week 1 and now in week 5. I don't see why he can't hit that kind of upside again. And I think he's going to have a nice safe floor this week as well. So love Antonio Brown in week 6.
All right, well, I'm going to finish off with another Brown, just not one you were expecting. That would be Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. Look, quietly, probably because he's on the Detroit Lions, he's become the number 1 receiver on that team. The first couple of weeks didn't really do much, but now 2 weeks in a row, he's led the team in targets and receptions. Has yet to score a touchdown, so that might be an issue going forward just because that's not a team that scores a lot of touchdowns, and if they do, it's usually a running back who's scoring, but it's possible. But he is giving you a nice floor in PPR leagues, getting several catches, 6 catches, 70 yards. Hey, you take that for a guy who you can slot in as your flex play. Quintus Cephas out with a fractured collarbone, and so that eliminates one of the very few quality receivers that they have. TJ Hawkinson should be a reliable target, but he's been banged up and it just hasn't done much lately. It's been St. Brown who's taken over as the lead target here in Detroit. So I think that he's a guy that you want to plug in, especially going against Cincinnati this coming week. It's a good matchup. Detroit's just going to have to keep passing the ball because they just never can seem to get a lead and stick with it. So I like St. Brown. He's just going to get better as the year goes on. So definitely somebody to add if he's available. And if he is already on your squad, go and feel free to put him in your line for week 6. All right, guys, that does it for week 6 must-start wide receivers. We definitely appreciate all the love we're getting. And again, if you want to support us, there's multiple ways you can do that, or join our Discord server and keep the conversation going all season long. Thanks for watching and good luck.